Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, things are still all in flux for me in terms of physical and mental health. There may be more news about that next week following my semi-annual oncologist appointment. As you guys know, I never wanted to let physical degradation, anxiety, or depression slow me down, so it's time for another episode of the show. Now, this one, I'm telling you up front, will be a little weirder than my usual fare because it ties much more into my day-to-day life than any episode to date. See, my guest this time is Raman Sehgal, author of a brand new management book, The Floundering Founder, 24 Lessons to Refocus Your Business and Better Yourself. Now, I've known Raman for, we're going to say 15 years through my non-podcast life. First, when I was editing Contract Pharma magazine, this business-to-business magazine about contract manufacturers in the pharmaceutical space, and now in my role as founder and president of a trade association in that same sector. Raman worked in marketing for one of the companies that advertised in my magazine, and then he began his own company, Ramarketing, which has become a major agency in the pharma services space. He's also become a good friend over the years, and we've helped support each other in both our professional and, I would say personal, but we'll just say not so professional lives. Now, with Raman's first book, The Floundering Founder, he explores failure. He goes into how his failures and missteps helped inform his progress in building Ramarketing, which has become a really successful agency in our weird niche, or as I call it, a strange little subset of the pharmaceutical world. He actually goes into the larger life sciences area, not just the services guys I represent, but neither here nor there. What I mean is the book is a nice counter to survivor's bias, where successful people go into all the things that work perfectly on the road to success and why they're absolute visionaries and geniuses. Raman goes into some of the missteps and the wrong steps that were taken, some of the failures that occurred and things that you learn from them. And the first half of the book, he really gets into that, again, mistakes and how to recover from them, as well as, when the time comes and what it means to step back and make strategic decisions in building a company of one's own. But I think you can read between the lines and get that some of these things are also applicable, in a non-entrepreneurial role or mindset. And in fact, the second half of the book goes into personal behavior and traits one can cultivate, we'll say, in order to run a business effectively and stay human. And some of those chapters, some of the lessons he puts there, they mirror traits that I've talked about and learned about on the show over the years from artists and writers and people who aren't in the business world. And, I'm sure the fact that Raman and I share some of those characteristics has been a big part of our friendship over the years. Now, The Floundering Founder it's written in a really conversational voice. It's 24 chapters. They are easy and digestible. We go into what makes a bad management book in this conversation and what sort of things he was trying to avoid doing. And this does not include a lot of jargon and heavy duty business speak. And especially in that second half, as I mentioned, there's much more about the human side of things and how we stay curious and how we learn how to listen. Raman also has a podcast that he does for the pharmaceutical world called Molecule to Market. And we go into a little bit of what it means to host that sort of show and listen to people and what we've each gained from making podcasts over the years. But anyway, I'm telling you too much about the conversation, which lies ahead. I will say that the book brings a dose of humanity to management and entrepreneurialism, with all the uncertainty and regret and celebration and goal setting and what it means to actually hit your goals, and a lot more. So in some respects, it helped me rethink some of what I've been doing with my trade association, but also some of the, like I say, not so professional aspects of my life too. So even if you're not in the business building space, you may get a lot out of the Floundering Founder. Now here's Raman's bio. Raman Sehgal is the founder of several niche companies, including Remarketing, a multi-million-dollar international marketing agency that helps companies get noticed in the global life science space. An entrepreneur from a very young age, Raman embarked on a business journey that ultimately spanned the Atlantic, from a spare room in the northeast of England to the bustling streets of Boston, Massachusetts, where he lives with his wife and 3 sons. Actually, that's out of date. He just moved back to UK a couple of weeks ago, but that's where we recorded from. I didn't know that before getting his bio. Anyway, Raman authentically shares his knowledge, mistakes, and learnings around the world as a keynote speaker, podcaster, blogger, Forbes Agency Council member, and guest university lecturer. His new book is The Floundering Founder. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Raman Sehgal. I think I've done podcasts with every writer, cartoonist, or illustrator who's mentioned me in the acknowledgements of their book. So yeah, it's not a cheat code for getting on the podcast, but it does help. So thank you for putting me in the acknowledgements for this one. And before we get to the role I played in your life somehow and worthy of being acknowledged for this, tell me about the decision to write The Floundering Founder. Where'd the book come from for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to tell you it had been an idea that had been in my head for years and years, and I'd kind of procrastinated and thought I'd always do it. Genuinely, during the pandemic, I was introduced to a publishing company, and something inside just kind of said, you know what, you could write a book, you could probably do this. And as you know, like I write blogs and kind of articles and stuff like that, and they tend to be pretty well received by people, and they tend to help people. I think primarily because I'm very authentic in terms of talking about my mistakes.
Yeah.
And so it tends to, I think it tends to resonate with people when you talk honestly about the things that have not gone to plan, as opposed to just all the good stuff. And so I suppose I took the essence of that, what had worked well in terms of blogs, and thought, okay, how can I build that same almost genre across a book, but a one that would ultimately help people where I was maybe 6-7 years ago. And then, yeah, and that was kind of it. And then kind of went down the track of actually starting to write and work, try to put some ideas down on paper. And it was it was a really fun process, actually. Like, part of me thought it was going to be the hardest thing in the world, and at times it was very hard, but it was also a incredibly satisfying process. I'm sure we'll talk about running at some point, but I absolutely liken it to running, like marathon training. It's discipline, it's dedication. It's just, the more you do, the better you get. And that was how I found
or
it.
your body breaks down like mine. But generally, you hope that doesn't happen. But tell me about that process of looking at the failures. I mean, I know you and I are both self-deprecating in that respect. We'll always bring up both crediting other people for successes and, highlighting the things we did wrong, while still being happy about the things that we've done well or that we've learned from.
Sure.
But tell me about, like, really, were there moments you thought, yeah, this was actually a major error for me, and I need to bring this to light so that, other people can avoid it?
That's exactly it. I think I'm always of the opinion that you can learn much quicker by seeing, or understanding the mistakes that others have made. If people just tell you, there's a million blogs and websites out there which tell you how to do things right, but not as many which kind of talk about the pitfalls and the mistakes that you will make on that journey. And certainly for me, I reflected back on some of the decisions that I've made and the hires you've made and the clients you've won and all that type of stuff, and tried to package, if you like, the kind of the mistakes that I made that I probably wouldn't do again. But the irony, of course, is you make those mistakes and you are better for them. So there is a really interesting kind of paradigm in that I'm so grateful for all those mistakes that I've made, and I think I am much better and stronger for making those mistakes. But at the same time, people could probably accelerate, their own self, investing in themselves or their business, whatever it is that they are doing, by simply just, I suppose, being mindful of the mistakes other people have made. It's not that they won't make those mistakes. I feel like it gives people the opportunity to go into a situation kind of with their eyes open and aware of the potential pitfalls, which I think is really helpful for others.
Yeah, I think being able to recognize this stuff, and I liken it in a weird way to just learning about the sector that we're both involved in, the whole pharmaceutical outsourcing world. I tell people nowadays, and for years now, when I started out in 1999, there was, Google was a thing, but barely. There wasn't a whole lot of information about what this sector was, and I had no background in it or in anything remotely connected to it. And so I had to learn everything on the fly. So anyone coming into the space, I try to give as much background as I can, with the idea that I wish to God in 1999 there was someone who could have done this for me. There really wasn't. Jim Miller was the only figure, this industry guru, but he didn't know who I was, didn't know what the magazine was. So the idea that you want to at least build some sort of institutional knowledge like that is useful, whether it's experiential stuff or just like the background for understanding an industry. Because right. Otherwise you're doomed, or at least you're wasting time, relearning things that someone else could have taught you or encapsulated better.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what did you learn from other books in the management and business space?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, I'm not as avid a reader as you are, Gil, but I do, intentionally spend time each day reading. I've actually it's probably similar to yourself. I make notes on every book that I read. So, if something grabs my attention or a quote or a learning, so I write it down in my Evernote kind of digital note keeper. And in the last couple of months, I actually have gone through all of those learnings that I've written down. And like, there are pages and pages and pages by book, but it is just a really fascinating process to go through to actually like relive some of those learnings that in the moment when you're reading a book and you're like, yeah, it's the greatest idea ever, and time passes on and, you forget about it. And it was a really useful exercise to almost reflect back on some of those learnings and almost reinforce them in my mind. They're probably somewhere in my brain, but it's, that kind of repetition piece certainly helps. But I mean, I'm in terms of like specifics, I mean, I'm a big fan of authors. I mean, I love Seth Godin's work. Obviously he's written lots of marketing books and things like that, which are in branding books, which I find fascinating. And I'm also into things like Tim Ferriss's books, and there's a writer called Derek Sivers who I really enjoy his work, his style of writing, and one of his books almost that I read had this kind of short chapter style about it, where each chapter was almost bite-sized. And as a kind of busy kind of entrepreneur, that's something that really, really resonated with me, that actually I get 10, 15 minutes a day to read and I can get some value. So that style, if you like, of kind of bite-sized, practical, real-life learnings was a big kind of inspiration for the kind of like 24 lessons that I've kind of packed into the Founding Founder.
Yeah, I appreciate it when I was going through the PDF that it wasn't Harvard Business Review charts, graphs, et cetera, where you're, basically slicing everything up into these weird, graphic representations of business growth, et cetera. So,
well, and how did you, I suppose, obviously having read it, how did you find, I suppose you have your own business as well, and, and obviously your ambitions might be slightly different to those that read the book, but did you find
there's a bunch of good stuff in it. I'll tell you, of all coincidences, we are recording on the 8th anniversary of the day I gave notice to quit my editorial magazine job and launch the trade association that I'm the founder and president of.
8 years. Congratulations, man.
Thanks. And it's maybe a year before your pre-midlife crisis, as you characterize it in the book. This is 2014 when my thing happened. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are aspects of it right down to just a few days ago. I had one of my bigger members told me they're not renewing their membership this year. And I, was reading your anecdotes of either not getting the win or losing a big customer, and had that instance of, yeah, I responded the way Raman suggests here also. I thanked them for all the support over the years, said, hope we could work together in future, reached out to other people just to ask, like, is it me? Is it you? What was it anything about what I'm doing? And they assured me it was, no, we're just, I would say post-pandemic, but, during pandemic, revising everything and reprioritizing. But yeah, we're keeping you in mind. But yeah, there's that sense of, when you break out early on, how to assess who we'll say clients are or customers, putting them into those sort of 4 quadrants. I had I've experienced this. And there are companies that I've either seen as not a good fit and understood, okay, these are, companies I should help somebody else work with and not, work with directly. Well, what I found great with the book was simply, I'd say capturing those things that I'd sort of intuited or, have kind of had to work through on my own. Seeing it written out here, I'm like, oh, again, same thing. This would have helped when I was going into the trade association. But at the same time, some stuff, like you said, you have to go through. Yeah. But it's good to see that reinforcement also that, this is, how you do things and how you maintain good relationships and how you walk away at the right times if something is clearly not going to be good for either party.
Exactly. And it's interesting, I would, obviously you've run your business for 8 years now, but you are, seasoned kind of in terms of experience in business and generally. And I think for someone like yourself and people that are, well into their career and running a business, I think there's probably, it's good reminders of things that just kind of reset at times and kind of realign. I think a lot of the book is helpful for people that have maybe gone off track slightly, but also what you said, things that you intuitively know, but it kind of gives you a framework to manage. And genuinely, in our business, we do the same. Like, we use that framework, and we look at clients that we don't want to kind of cull client or anything like that. That's it sounds very ruthless, but sometimes clients are not worth the value they bring is not kind of worth it versus the pain. And
we always joked back in the old magazine days that it was the smallest, least frequent advertiser who was always the biggest hassle. It was invariably the guy who takes a quarter page twice a year is the guy who complains about the print quality and wants his money back and everything else. So
and I genuinely believe that's the same for most businesses, actually, and that the people that value what you do and spend money with you and like working with you are relatively low maintenance in comparison with the companies that, let's say, can't afford you or don't value what you do. That's often a recipe for disaster. And I've had some very painful experiences in the past dealing with those. And and you mentioned kind of my midlife crisis piece in the book, and I remember one in particular, and it was such an awful experience. And, I think in the book I talk about the client, they were paying for, I don't know, a 1990, Toyota Corolla, and they were expecting a Tesla, right? Like the expectation levels were just absolutely crazy in comparison with, what they were spending. Right. And it was such a horrible experience. But, back to what you said before, Gil, if I'd not been through that pain, I probably wouldn't have been able to help others and kind of articulate, like, to look out for these things. And that's ultimately what I think is useful for that type of framework. It's like, before you even have them as a client, like, look for those red flags, before you sign up, because you see them well in advance. Unreal expectations, just chipping at price, chasing you. Like there's a multitude of characteristics that will not sit right with most people, and I think that's why I think that type of framework is quite useful for people to just don't chase the cash, because it can often bite you in the backside if you go down that direction.
Yeah, and it's one of the areas when we talk about like the differences between what I do with as an association and the firms that you've built. My biggest thing is that it's a nonprofit, so I literally can't sell the company. It can be transferred, but there's no like payout and Gil gets taken care of at the end, outside of a bullet to the head. But that's our American version of taken care of. But yeah, there's a sense of like, you build something, and understanding that what you built, other people can see externally and put a value on, does have to mean something. It has to feel pretty good. And you go through an anecdote about that, that somebody coming in wanting to buy out your firm, and it turns out somebody respects what we do and they're actually willing to put a dollar value on it. Not a dollar value you were willing to part with it for, but
maybe I should have. I look back. Maybe that was I missed my call. But it's funny. Obviously, that was 4 or 5 years ago now, and I was unbelievably naive going into that conversation, and I'm still really good friends with the guy that that conversation happened with, and I just didn't see. I didn't see anyone. I just didn't see that conversation coming where someone would be like, "Hey, yeah, we're thinking we might buy your company," and I was just kind of like, "What?"
Hamana.
But I just, we were. It's obviously, entrepreneurism and kind of like startups and tech and all this is very fashionable these days. But even 5 years ago, there weren't many companies starting up and selling, and so people like myself, it was never even on my radar to be able to build a company, to be able to sell it. It never crossed my mind at one point in my life, which sounds incredibly naive, because I was still probably like yourself on a journey where I was like, oh, I really enjoy doing this and I can make a good living and I don't have to work for anyone. And this is pretty cool. And my team seems to like me, and they seem to want to stay with us, and clients seem to like us. And then, someone comes along and says, hey, we'll give you X million for your company. It was a bizarre situation, but one that really made me kind of step back and go, as you said there, Gil, so this thing has value. I did not see that coming. So.
When you're on the inside of any of these things, there's that sense of not being able to step back. And you go into that also in terms of, like you've said, team building and managing, which for neither of us is a strong suit, which is why I'm one person with a freelancer. And I hate myself, but it's still that sense of when you're so focused tactically on things, having to step back and see the bigger picture. It's for me it's difficult, but for you, I wondered in the process of making the book or writing the book, what you learned. You said you went back and sort of crystallized a lot of the notes and things you'd taken from other work, but what did you learn from the process of writing this, besides that you can write a book, that was genuinely a surprise to you?
That is a great question. I think there's two things come to mind. One, I think, is the sheer process of writing a book and the discipline required. That piece is a great reminder of you can achieve a lot more than you think when you dedicate time and effort. Whatever it is you want to do in life, if you make the time to do it. I made an hour a day, Gil, for a year. That's how long it took me. Now, when you think about that, that's not a huge amount of time, but the discipline of doing it every day almost made me think, okay, you can do some big stuff in your life when you really kind of dedicate the time. I think in terms of the actually writing the book, it was funny, it sounds crazy this, but I finished the book 6 months ago, and then obviously the publisher does their thing, and I was actually flicking. I've got physical copies last week, and I was flicking through the book, and I was reading something. I was like, we should do that again. I don't know why we aren't doing that at the minute. And actually, I found myself, obviously the learnings and the practical tips that I've tried to give people. You start with the best intention, but sometimes you can get off track. And at times, when life is busy and throw COVID into the mix and having kids and all that kind of stuff, like you can lose your way. And I think for me, there was a few things in there, like the client matrix, like we talked about, like not chasing the money, like the way that we look after our team. And these things are really important. And there was one as well, I think later on in the book, I talk about networking and the value of just meeting people. And I found myself, I think, in a cab one day, and I had my headphones in, and I was just kind of sitting there on my phone, and I literally wrote in the book, like, that's a missed opportunity. So in a bizarre way, I found myself reconnecting with a lot of the things that I'm advising other people do. And it tends to make the world like a better place when you open your eyes and you talk to people and you're not on your phone and things like that. And, there's so many opportunities in my life have come from just talking to the guy next to me or the girl next to me and saying hello, and you just never know where opportunities come from. And I think it's incredibly convenient these days to, have your AirPods in and just be looking down at your phone because the work never stops, or the battle for your attention is just kind of always there. And I think for me, that's probably a timely reminder just to, like after the interview today, I'm off to my in-laws' house, and we're having Christmas dinner together because we couldn't be together for Christmas, and recording well after Christmas. But I will put my phone down and I will play with the kids, and I will be kind of as present as possible with those people there. And even things like that, I think almost going through the book is like, I need to practice what I preach, right? I can't put things in that book and advise people and then do the exact opposite. It didn't sit right with me morally, but also it's just, it's a book that's meant to be authentic. So yeah, those are some of the things that I think I found really kind of useful during the process.
And I like the book splitting the first 12 chapters or lessons on focusing the business, and the second half on the personal side, what one has to do, and not simply what one has to do as a business person and leader, but what you have to do personally to keep some sense of balance. So I should ask though, what would make you, given that you've read a lot of business and marketing books, what makes you put down or throw one of those across the room and just say, this is completely not worth my time? Like, are there aspects, and you don't have to name names, but
I hate jargon. I detest jargon. So with marketing books in particular, I think there's actually a really good book called The One-Page Marketing Plan. And it's an unbelievably simple framework for marketing, where effectively you think about your buyer before, during, and after. That's the framework. It's unbelievably simple. And I mean, there's a little bit of jargon in the book as he goes into more detail, but I really enjoyed that book for its simplicity. And, I'm a marketing graduate. I've done it for 20 years and all that kind of stuff. And it was a really timely reminder of some of the basic premise and that type of thing I really, really enjoy. And the types of books that grab my attention in the kind of same genre or dare I say, the ones that have similarities with mine in terms of they're short and bite-sized in terms of the kind of learnings and lessons, but also based on real life experience. And so there's some sense of authenticity and kind of reality.
Sort of conversational style that you have
absolutely.
in your prose. Yeah.
And I do like that style. I mean, it's funny, in the last couple of weeks, a couple of people said to me, did you write this? I was like, yeah.
I know it has a dictated quality because it's got your voice to it. Yeah.
And the kind of, someone said, did you get a ghost right? And I was like, no, like I literally wrote every word. And there's a bit of, obviously with the publisher, you work with the editorial team to tidy it up and all that kind of stuff. But, the content is all mine. And I think people are quite surprised by the kind of conversational tone. But again, I think there's a paragraph early on where I would genuinely, I think, when you get a book that's written by, some kind of Harvard MBA professional, and I think it's often designed to make that person look as intelligent as possible within that kind of, that community, of academics or whatever. And I just, those types of books don't help a real life entrepreneur who's busy doing stuff and having to make, decisions and things like that. And so I genuinely tried to write one that was kind of non-corporate and really, easy to read and conversational, and that, you know, someone could read it for 10 minutes in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to take that into my business today, and that's going to make a difference to my company. And I think that was a very like from the start, that was very intentional to be non-academic, and I'm not saying those books are terrible or anything like that, because clearly there's an audience for those books. But I think busy entrepreneurs with families and busy lifestyles don't have much time, and they don't want to be Googling what a particular word means or a phrase means.
Yeah. I understood. That's what I always sort of wonder within specific fields like that, whether it's, you know, whether it makes more sense to be accessible to a general audience versus, you know, and there's a place for the sort of textbook jargon, but that's a classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, but tell me about imposter syndrome, given that we both go through that, you know, and always had that, for me, there was always that sense of, I'm going to get caught at some point. You know, it was about 5 years ago now. I know the exact event. It was a few weeks after the 2016 election in the US, where I had the moment of, oh, wait a second. I'm not an imposter. They're all imposters. And the reason nobody gets busted is because they're afraid they'll be the next one to get caught. I'm all set. But did you have a getting over it?
No,
moment?
Absolutely not.
No?
I still suffer
feel like
today.
you're kind of getting away with something.
Yeah, and honestly, I do. Like I you know, and the irony, obviously, having this conversation with you is, I feel like an imposter because I've written a book, but I have written the book, and I am a published author, and I still feel like an imposter. But it's
I'm
crazy.
getting away with it.
But you know, it's particularly in business. I think less so probably the book. I do. You know, I've been so fortunate that my businesses have you know, in particular, remarketing has been a really successful business and continues to be a successful business. And I definitely feel it. You know, I'll give you a real life. I had a conversation with one of my colleagues this morning. We've got some presentations next week, and you know, she asked me. One of her concerns was, you know, was her age, because she's relatively young, and I was kind of like, look, you are brilliant at what you do, and you are more than capable of being in this role that you are in, and it doesn't matter how old you are. And you know, that person was feeling imposter syndrome to an extent, in that someone's going to catch them out because of their age. And I think I've had that for most of my kind of business career. I think it's less so now than it was 5 years ago. And the reason for that is, I think, you know, you spend more and more time with different people, and what you start to realize is actually you're probably not the smartest person in the room, but I've kind of learned that I'm probably not the least smart person in the room. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. And, you know, and also as you know, my team's now 55, 60 people now. I've kind of learned what I'm good at. So I'm probably an imposter when it comes to certain aspects, but I'm not when it comes to others. And so I think that's the other thing, is like, I try to stay in my lane now of where I can add the best value to clients and my team and the business and all that type of thing. And I feel more confident and less insecure in those places. But I don't think it should ever go away. I actually think that imposter syndrome is a
way of proving yourself.
Yeah, and it's also a sense of humility with people, that we don't, you know, we're always kind of got that niggle of insecurity, and it makes us hungry and avoid complacency. And not everyone is like that. You know, you're a great. I think you are like that, similar to myself, and that. But it also probably keeps you on your toes, because you think, oh God, I'm going to get caught out and all that type of thing. And I think it probably makes you do a better
my
job.
solution to that, I have two solutions for that. One is being a white guy who looks good in a suit, which really goes a long way to make people think you know what you're talking about, even though clearly I don't.
Especially if it was the suit that I saw you in when I saw you a few months ago. That was
I can rock, you know, the good business attire. But my other thing, I just tell people straight up, I have no pharmaceutical, technical, government, regulatory background of any kind. I wasn't trained in any of this stuff. And, you know, I just figure if I keep bluffing, you guys will keep falling for it. And they always laugh, which is how I keep getting away with it for 23 years now. But yeah, and there's a degree, I'm joking, of course, because you learn just through the experience of doing this stuff. Mm-hmm. But the idea that, you know, I would be registered as a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry, that's kind of weird, all things considered. But, you know, somehow through one of or several of the aspects you bring up, especially on the personal side, the willingness to learn and the willingness to be curious, it turns out you learn a lot more than you think you know.
I agree.
In some circumstances. Because again, same thing, nothing you did prepared you for pharmaceutical development services and how to brand that stuff and do marketing for them.
Yeah, you're right.
And
I'm
yet,
exactly the same
it,
as you. Yeah, exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I, overinvested in learning in those areas because I never wanted to get caught out. So you kind of, and so kind of, I didn't want to be, I'd kind of go into the nth degree to learning about something. So no one thought I was, stupid or something like that. And everyone just assumes that, I come from a pharmaceutical or a scientific background, and it's
the Indian thing probably helps.
It's the Indian thing. Plus, my name is like a famous chemistry thing. So Raman Spectrometry, I think it's called. I can't remember what it's called. But you kind of you go into labs all over the world, and my name's on the wall, and they just like, "Is this you? Did you start this?" And I'm like, "No." But,
I'm a huge spectroscopy expert. You found me out.
And I'm like, "Yeah, if you want to associate with me, like that's good." So and obviously I have a podcast for that sector now, and all it's done is just reinforce, to your point, a bit like the lobbying, that I know what I'm talking about, and I have learned, like, probably the same as you, like, we probably know more than we give ourselves credit for, but we also are aware of our limits. If something gets crazy technical and it goes really into the weeds of the science, and you and I are probably experienced enough to say, hey, this is way out of my comfort zone.
The best thing you can do is I will get back to you with somebody who can answer that.
Yes.
And that's so much better than let me make up something and just the willingness to know your limits and be completely upfront about them, I find always helps. Exactly. By the way, with the Indian thing, did your parents expect you to become a doctor? Or were they okay with because you married a doctor?
I did. And,
so did that make up for it or not?
Probably. You know what? I remember when I chose one of my brothers is an attorney, and the eldest one is he still works in retail. He has gas stations and kind of quite a bit more entrepreneurial. And when I chose marketing at university, and I can remember my mum like, "Why are you not doing accountancy? Why are you not doing something that directly relates to a specific job?" And thank God I didn't go down that route. And she, and still to this day, I don't think my mum has a clue about what my businesses do or anything like that. But the medical thing was never really one for us because I wasn't great at the sciences, and I didn't show any interest in the sciences at school. So my mum was kind of like, I think my parents thought that I would go into something related to business. But I don't think my mum kind of laughs now because she's kind of like, she was really worried for me in my 20s because she's like, I have no idea what he's doing with his life. He's doing this marketing thing. Yeah. Neither did I, to be fair. I'm not saying I knew what I was doing, but a few lucky breaks here and there and a good attitude and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of worked out pretty well.
So you mentioned having a podcast, you've got Molecule to Market. Mm-hmm. What have you learned from hosting a podcast and talking to people in that format?
I've learned to ask better questions and really listen to the answer, which sounds like I'm being silly, but
no, this is exactly what I tell people.
It's because I'm having to concentrate on, because it's probably similar to yourself, you're kind of making notes to be able to summarize the podcast, and it's kind of key things that really grab your attention. And so if you kind of let your mind wander, or if you go on to Google and start looking at stuff, like you can lose you can kind of lose the kind of train of thought you're on in terms of that conversation and really miss the point. And that can be, I think, unfair on the guest. So I think basic things around asking questions and listening, I think are really kind of important. The other thing is it definitely, I think that you get a sense of respect from the guest because you are the host, and it does elevate your own stature in their eyes, which wasn't, it's not an ego trip or anything like that, but I found that quite fascinating. I mean, I've had the privilege, I mean, it's probably similar to yourself. I know you've interviewed some amazing guests on your show, but, I've interviewed some like really, really bright, kind of people that running billion-dollar companies. And I think if I emailed any of them today, I'd probably get a response straight away. And so they almost look at me as a peer, if that makes sense. And I think that
I tell you, I have the same thing. I'm friends/friendly with people I have only met for 1 hour for a podcast. And I always joke that I assume the moment I leave the room, all memory of me disappears. Like that there's no one has any object permanence. And people I recorded with like 7 or 8 years ago, still, like same thing, if I drop them a line, you know, they don't have to be billion-dollar CEOs, but they're people who just remember the experience. And if you treat them well, you know, it becomes a good thing for both sides. You know, they want to, you know, oh, that guy I talked to a couple of years ago, and, you know, sort of keep it going.
It can also be an amazing experience for the guest. And we had a guest on who she shared the podcast with her family, and her family had no idea of the journey she'd kind of been on and what she now does. And she sent me a lovely note afterwards, just to say, it was something along the lines of, you know, I can't explain to you how much that meant to me and my family, because we have a record of that conversation, and my family have shared it, and they're all so proud of me. And this was someone who was running $1 billion entity of a company. This is, you know, unbelievably bright individual, and yet it kind of connected with her and her family on an emotional level. And I think actually, Gil, you might have told me the story about a podcast that you once did, and then you ended up going to the funeral of
I was just going to say the memorial for Sandy McClatchy, and when his family discovered our podcast and realized there was an hour and a half of their dead brother that they could hear. You
it's
know,
incredible.
Again, I was just going to tell you that someday you will experience this, where guests you've had, you know, have died, and this will be the record.
Well, in fact, Gil, it did happen. It happened a few months ago, and interestingly enough, so I interviewed a guy about a year ago, and the podcast never went live because, you know, when we went to get sign off, there was a delay, and then it turned out that he was off work, and obviously we didn't know anything that, you know, and then I got told that he wasn't very well, and then you know, later found out that he'd unfortunately kind of passed away. And he had connected me with his wife, because his wife was a realtor in Boston. So he was saying, look, if you guys want to buy somewhere in the future or something like that, you should speak to my wife. And so I'd messaged her, and then I was on her mailing list, so she was sending like properties or whatever. And then I dropped her a message just to say, I'm so sorry to hear of, you know, the loss of your husband. By the way, I interviewed your husband, you know, 6 months before he passed away. Like, would you like? And she had probably similar reaction you had from Sandy's family. She was like, oh my God, like, do you mind? And I was like, no. And I immediately like sent it across and said, look, it's in the nature of my interviews are kind of like, you know, goes into the background of the individual and how their childhood, and, you know, how they got into school and how they got into the pharmaceutical industry. And it's as much personal as it is about their professional career. And she was incredibly grateful, and I think it got shared amongst his kids and his families. And you know, it's funny because it was a bit, I think when you told me that story, it was kind of like, we are, you know, it's like a digital record, isn't it, for life, that these things are going to live forever. Now, whether anyone ever listens to them.
Yeah, but it's still you know, in a world where everyone is just, again, posting TikTok videos or, you know, 2-second messages and all that,
Absolutely.
The idea that someone had room to talk, you know, and leave behind a record like that, you know, what we do actually does mean something, if we do it right. You know?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that room to talk piece is beautiful, because that's exactly what it is in a kind of, you know, hyper world of, you know, instant gratification, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's what the beauty, I think, of these interviews are with individuals is you know, let's say, you know, God forbid something happens to me in, you know, next few years, and my kids might wonder, well, like, why did Dad write a book? Like, how did that come about? And this, but they'll have this to be able to answer that question and get some insight into that type of thing. So it's a good thing. And I'm, you know, it's certainly not something you do to make money or anything like that. It has to be a passion of yours. And and probably like you, Gil, I mean, I enjoy learning from people, right? You know, you asked before, I've learned so much by just asking questions and learning. And so, you know, most of the people I interview are leaders of businesses, but there is commonality between all of them, the way they talk about the team, the way they operate, the kind of the values that they have. It's incredible how similar you see this. You hear the same things again and again, and it's not cliched business book stuff. It's actually like, I've been doing this for 30 years, and here's the 2 or 3 things that really matter. And when you hear them again and again, you can't help but adopt some of that and try and bring it into your own business, and ultimately help the rest of your team and organization by learning these things from other leaders.
So let me ask, for someone who you have anxiety, you get as nervous or neurotic as I do sometimes, being responsible for 50 or 60 people and their livelihoods, does it weigh on you?
Never.
Are there moments of like, holy shit, no. I'm on this tightrope and I got all these people on top of me?
Never. Honestly, never, ever. It's never worried me. And like, maybe I'm unique in that sense. And I just...
No, I think I'm the one who's a complete fuck up.
No, because people always ask that question, and they always say, don't get me wrong, I'm very aware of that responsibility, and I'm not demeaning how important that is. It's more, I have confidence in my ability and confidence in the ability of the team that the last thing to ever happen will be that, hopefully I'm not tempting fate, but that we'll have to let people go or anything like that. And even during the pandemic, we made a very bullish stance over that. We were not going to furlough any staff. We were not going to let anyone go as long as we could. And actually we did all these contingency plans around, we'll do everyone gets a 10% pay cut or a 20% pay cut. Thankfully, we never had to do any of those things because the business continued to grow, and the fortune, I think, of being in the pharmaceutical sector. But our view was like, we're gonna ride this kind of together, and we're gonna stick together and try and retain everyone's livelihoods and all that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a fascinating thing, because a lot of people say, it keeps me up at night, but it doesn't with me. I don't let my mind go there. And quite honestly, it's one of the reasons, I think in the book I talk about making money. I think I'm not ashamed of the fact that my business makes money, because it helps add security to the lives of those that work for the company. So I'm not even remotely, and that's not profiteering or anything like that, as opposed to that's just sensible business practice. Yeah. And I'm pretty loud and proud about that. And I think the types of businesses that frustrate me are the ones that, they're all show, and they've had, these pre-revenue companies that, 1 in a million makes it, and the rest just burn through other people's cash and, leave that, and then just do that thing and then move on to the next. And those aren't the businesses that make the economy go, right? Like those are not the businesses that employ people for years and years. And I think for me, that's the type of business that I always wanted to run, that people felt secure in, and that type of thing.
Yeah. Here in the U.S., we just had the trial for Theranos for Elizabeth Holmes, and the whole, fake it till you make it, except, it involved lab studies and human beings who were getting bad lab results. But, the idea that growth at all costs. Well, it's a question that came up from another small trade association president who I work with closely, because we're both the little guys among the big trade associations representing the real pharma companies. And years ago, he asked me, how big do you want the association to be? And I stared at him blankly, because this is about 3 years into having formed the association. We were getting ready to testify in front of a congressional committee, he and I. And I said to him, John, I literally have never stopped to think about that. It was one of those moments. I'm like, I've been just building the association, getting a base of members in place. I never thought about what's enough. And we're still trying to figure that out as a board and everything else. But yeah, there's that sense of, again, balancing the day-to-day versus the strategic, and getting to understand what you really want to be. But
that's very common though, Gil. What you've just described there, I think, is incredibly common, where you've just focused on your members and focused on doing the best possible job, and your business has succeeded because of that. And then at some point on that journey, which, to the point of a lot of where the book is aimed at, is that was a bit of a moment for you where you were like, okay, I should probably have a plan.
This is where your book resonated for me the most. It was that, I will admit, I have been in the fog, just, going forward and hoping not to fall off a cliff. But yeah.
And that is really, and I know that because I did exactly the same for 6 years. And to an extent, like now, at the start of the year, we've got a 1 year plan, a 3 year plan, and a 5 year plan. And we have a direction of travel. And I kind of think, how on earth? What did we do for 6 years? We just and we're not perfect at it by any stretch of the imagination. And, you get into the detail day to day, but I think what you've just described is so common, and it's fine because I think it's also probably one of the reasons that businesses like yours succeed, because all you did was focus on your members and giving them the best experience. And so because the danger is if you're so internally focused, you forget to focus on the people that pay the bills. And I think that's always the balance as business grows, is you start doing systems and processes and all right, we've got to hit this profit margin and all that type of thing, and you can be your eyes are on the wrong place, because your eyes should always be on how do I make my customer's life better, easier, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's there's been a lot of things I could have learned, I suppose. Again, having books like this would have probably helped me when I was starting out, except I was too panicked to do anything but, build my marketing materials, make phone calls, and try to get the association going. But yeah, having some perspective like this would have helped me. Same way knowing about the CMO sector would have helped me in 1999.
Yeah.
It would have been good to have some of a book like yours in front. So you should have gone back and written this years earlier. That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry, Gil. I should have
you
done
let
it.
Me down.
When you said you were starting the association, I should have done it then. That would have been helpful.
Yeah. But you were, in fact, I think the first person I told, because as I mentioned, it was the anniversary of when I gave notice, January 16th. And that was a Friday. And on the following weekend, I flew to the UK and had 2 client visits with you. And then I forget who else I went to go see, but I filled you in at the time. I was like, I have 6 weeks left at Contract Pharma. And after that, I'm going to be doing this trade association, which I didn't understand what it meant, but I knew, you would help if there was any, either directing me to member companies or just if I needed, I got to sell this to people and market this, it would have been good to hit you up if necessary. So, and
it's it's funny because I remember we were sat and having dinner up in an art gallery restaurant in the northeast of England, having that conversation, and it's amazing to see your journey and what you've achieved in the last 8 years. And obviously you've continued the great podcast work, but a lot of your listeners probably don't know that much, that you've built a fantastic association.
They blank out, and I'm sure this will be an episode where they're like, Gil, we don't understand what you're talking about. And yet it'll be the most downloaded one of all time because of your name recognition. So.
Well, I can tell you, listener, Gil has built a brilliant trade association that helps other members in the pharmaceutical sector and the supply chain. And one of my businesses is proudly a member of Gil's association, and we have certainly benefited as a member from being associated with it. And so it's awesome. And you get inundated with newsletters and stuff every week, and yours comes in on a Friday, I think. And it's probably the one that I avidly read every week. And so,
it's funny because the newsletter is the concession I made to quitting trade magazines, because it took me a few months with the association to realize. It's something I talked about with another guest recently, about Graydon Carter, the guy who used to run Vanity Fair and a couple of other big magazines. That I bumped into Carter in an airport when he was, he'd already announced he was leaving Vanity Fair, no announcement of what he was going to do. And I recognized him. We shot the breeze for a couple of minutes. And I emailed him after to just say, you've been putting out magazines or newspapers since the early 80s. And this is going to be the first time in your life that you don't have a thing coming out regularly. Like, you have business things and other open-ended stuff and deliverables, etc. But what I discovered when I left the trade magazine was I was making the podcast regularly. So that was a recurring thing. But I was like, I'm not, seeing page proofs and doing all the stuff 10 times a year that I was doing for Contract Pharma. And that's what led to maybe a weekly newsletter for the association would be a good idea. So that way, and it took me months and months to do that, but it was that real weird shift of going from producing a regular thing plus a trade show to open-ended goals of convince the FDA to bring our association into a negotiation or comment on this docket guidance. It became a very different sort of job while also having the recruitment and marketing and the other stuff that I had to do. So yeah, telling a hugely accomplished guy in his late 60s or early 70s that he might get weirded out by changing jobs like this or retiring was audacious on my part. But within about 8 months, he launched a weekly newsletter, which is very similar to Vanity Fair, so that it turned out Graydon was actually producing a thing regularly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he must have already had that planned, but and
you can write. That's it. I mean, clearly you have you are a good writer, and so it also probably flexes that muscle from your perspective, that you haven't lost that ability to just keep doing what you're really, really good at. Are you ever tempted to write a book, Gil, yourself? I mean,
no, we could talk about my failures if you want, because it is about the floundering founder. No, I was always supposed to be the writer when I was a kid. I was supposed to be this great novelist, etc., and just never succeeded. Was too neurotic and just couldn't get myself to write. I've written like a couple of short stories over the last 30 years. I did that. I don't know if I ever sent you a copy, but the one zine that I put out early in the pandemic.
Oh, yes, I remember. I read it. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because I have a story from that same week in England. Actually, the Vale of York story that is from there. But yeah, no, I've found ways of short-circuiting myself and undermining my writing in that way. But anytime I beat myself up for not being productive, people just laugh at me because of, the job, the podcast, taking up art, running, all the other stuff. It's no, Gil, you are productive. You just aren't productive in the one thing you think you're supposed to be productive in.
I was going to say, you've got your art as well in your podcast, and you've got all these little creative outlets that obviously scratch that itch, and it's whether or not you decide at some point in your life to combine them all. And I imagine you could even compile lessons and learnings.
The podcast
and stuff
could become a book,
because it's an incredible. There have been some amazing authors on here, and I'm sure they're probably similar things. Maybe I'm guessing you'll see themes across the people that you interview. Over the years that they all say a similar thing about the process or anything like that. But yeah.
Once again,
I'll be a fan. I'm happy to if you decide to go down that route anyway.
It would turn into real work at that point. And I there's always the I got that suggestion from this very intelligent and legendary designer, and his first thing was, just get transcripts of all your episodes and then figure out the common themes and quote the guests and, run some of these great photos that you take of them, and boom, you're done. I'm like, well, yes, I could do that, but that would mean making something more than the podcast already is, which would mean taking time off from the show itself. But we'll see. It's, I figure managing this every week, closing in on episode 500 this summer, health permitting.
It's incredible.
It's a weird archive, but it keeps me off the streets, I suppose.
Which we're all great. For you, everyone's grateful.
Oh yeah, nobody wants to see me out, idle with nothing to do. One of the things you bring up in the book, as sort of tying into that question of how big do you want the company to be, or what goals do you have in place? You mentioned a sort of concrete one when you were out having drinks with the team, that someday we'll be having drinks at a rooftop bar in Tokyo. And the idea that this would symbolize a degree of success, that we're now an international firm, we're doing this, we're able to have this same event, on the other side of the world. Did you manage to do that prior to the pandemic, or is it still sort of on hold as a longer term goal?
Because of you, we did it in we did it in Taiwan, which is not a million miles away, and that was as close to that, and it was the big tower in Taipei in Taiwan, and our mutual friend Bobby, we were having dinner and drinks, and I just looked around and went, oh, I think it's that I think this is that moment. I mean, the irony again, actually, because if you, we did win a Japanese client during the pandemic, and we've built a fantastic relationship with those guys, and they've kind of said, "Hey, come over whenever you can." And obviously, the travel restrictions is stopped us from doing that, but. Yeah, I mean, it will happen, certainly. And it's funny because because it's on the verge of happening, and it's kind of happened to an extent, albeit not quite in Tokyo, but nearby. It's now, we're trying to think of a new kind of version. And one thing that, I'm going to kind of aim the team at is that I had this idea of we take the entire team and their partners and families, and we go see the Northern Lights in Iceland. And that sounds on one hand like, well, clearly it's a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. But it's also, I just think it's one of those things in life that people always will say, I'd love to go and see the Northern Lights. And, it's not like, hey, let's go and, get really drunk in a bar or something in New York. Like it's a little bit more, it has more substance to that. And we have a global team, right? We have a team in the US, we have a team in Europe, a team in the UK. And so it also was kind of like, okay, where can we go and do something kind of magical? So that's almost the version 2 of the Tokyo dream now, which I'm kind of working towards, because that would be an amazing thing to do for our team and their families, especially for our kids or whatever as well. And yes, clearly it will cost a huge amount of money when we get to that point, but I think it's a good goal to aim at, and it's also so tangible, right? It's not like, hey, we want to be, X $1 million company and all that kind of stuff. Like no one cares. Like that doesn't stick. It's not memorable. Whereas I think something like, our aim is. Well,
they would see it as great. The bosses get the money and we put all the work in, as opposed to treating them like this and bringing everyone together. Gosh.
Yeah, which would be amazing, and that's something that I think we are. I don't know when it'll happen, obviously with COVID, and it might be 5 years away, but it's a direction of travel and something to look forward to. And we desperately tried to get our team together for the last 2 years, but it's really difficult to get everyone to fly in with COVID restrictions. Or we were trying to meet in Dublin at one point, and then it got cancelled because Ireland made it's just the world we live in at this present moment in time. But hopefully, if Bill Gates is right, we're going to have a better 2022 and beyond, which will be great for everyone.
I'll keep our fingers crossed, given that, so many of the companies you and I work with are the guys actually helping save the world, which is always the saving grace. Anytime there's what am I doing? I'm running a trade association, this or that, or I'm doing branding and marketing for, these companies, and you realize, they're helping
pretty
save
important,
the world.
We're
doing something good.
It's fascinating, I'm not going to clearly name client names, but most of the drugs the COVID vaccines are made by our clients.
Well, there's publicly available stuff like Catalent and Grand River are members of mine, and they're publicly out there as making this stuff. And it's that realization of
it's the same with us. That one of the drugs, vaccines, one of the top 3 in the world is made by several of our clients all over the world, and I can't sit there and take any responsibility for that or anything like that, but it's.
But you feel you played some little part.
I feel proud. Like I feel privileged and proud to be part of that journey, and that people also have a bit more of an understanding of what we actually do. Because you can now really
there's a double-edged sword, but
it is. There's also a limelight on the sector that the sector doesn't particularly want on the sector, but it has made it more accessible to people, that they understand that actually, these companies are doing some good and add a lot of value to the world and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're very, considering we're not that from that space, I think you and I have done well to both forge careers in a really, really specialist niche sector. That turns out that it's added quite a lot of value in our lifetime, which is just probably a combination of fortune and just being in the right place at the right time.
Sure. Now, as far as regrets with the book go, I'm just wondering, do you regret using Novak Djokovic as an example?
My wife legitimately asked me that question this morning, because when we came down this morning, my wife brought our youngest down, and I was like, "Oh, have you seen Djokovic has been deported out of Australia. And she's like, was he in your book? And I was like, he was in my book. And then I tried to say, well, you know, I was talking about his dedication to his profession, which you can't argue that, right? He is.
Yeah.
But I don't think I went into his the details of his moral compass and
yeah. Well, it was his dedication to craft, but also there was a little bit of the, you know, taking care of his body, etc. I was like, oh boy, okay. Well, that's you know, we all. You know,
it was medical reasons. It's medical reasons. You can't have a vaccine.
I got walloped by dose 2 and the booster, but you know, I was recovered within like 2 days or so. But not him. Apparently, no. That's you know, both the not getting vaccinated and the just running around spreading potentially to other people was not cool. But anyway, that's Djokovic. That's regrets. The other question I have, and it's one that a writer I know mentioned recently, the importance not of having mentors, which you do go into in the book, but the importance of being someone else's nemesis. Mm-hmm. And realizing that someone else looks at you not just as a you know, potential competitor, but you know, sees what you do as something they have to get better at doing. Have you ever found that you were someone's nemesis, and that you know, you were driving other people to greater heights just to try to beat you?
That is hopefully this isn't you telling me you're that person, Gil. That would be very unfortunate.
No, not in our world. No, my great one was back in my contract pharma days when I realized someone Googled Gil Roth as an asshole, because in the old days, the site metrics would actually show you the search terms that led to your site. Yeah. And I realized from the IP address, it was from someone in my office, which was particularly weird. I couldn't figure out who it was because there were way too many suspects. But yeah, it was one of those moments. But I've realized in later years, when people have mentioned to me that, oh, we were really jealous of you, or you were our nemesis for this and that, I'm like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had that role. But in your world?
I mean, you know, there are competitors that we work against, but I think that's a bit too obvious, if that makes sense. I think it's probably maybe, and it might be people who have left the business and gone on to do their own thing, and you might have a sense of, you know, I didn't give them enough opportunity or whatever, and then they've gone on to do great stuff, and that, in my eyes, is a great thing. I'll show him. You know,
yeah.
I don't see that as a bad thing. It's probably the other way around, to be honest with you. I'm quite childish in that sense, where if I'm burnt in a situation, I'm almost motivated to show that person, if that makes sense. Which is, so like we've had people that have left our business over the years, and a handful have gone in not in great circumstances, and I felt personally kind of disrespected, disrespected, or like I'd given those individuals my all and given them every opportunity, and felt a bit like screwed over, and actually that is something I find very motivating. Not that I sit there and be like, right, I'm going to show you. It's just instinct where I'm kind of like, you know what, this is a long game, and you guys are going to see what I can do now. And in one sense, I am competitive generally, but I think it's particularly where I felt wronged by people. And that's not even you pitch for work, and if you lose it, like, I have no problem with that. Like, yes, learn from the experience, but if someone beats you because they've came up with a better idea or their proposition is better, like, that's fine. I think the thing for me, the kind of nemesis side of things, is just people that you've tried to help in life and they have taken advantage of that, or they've screwed you over in some way. I find that very that's been a motivating factor for me, and it probably is for others. Like, there will be people that have that view of me. And I suppose, like, and I always worry, right? Because, like, people are like, well, people get jealous and they're envious and they'll start bitching about you and all that kind of stuff. And I haven't felt it as, like, personally yet. Maybe when the book comes out, they're all going to write horrible reviews, and I'll not be able to sleep for 2 weeks. But yeah, I try my best in life to be generous and kind, and just not even, I think there's, and I think in the book I even talk about, there are client relationships that I've that have ended, and I've tried not to burn bridges with people because I just think life's too short to do that. And I think hopefully that they are few and far between where I haven't hurt people. But if they are motivated by me and my success, then good for them. And if that works for them, and I have no problem with it.
Yeah, I literally wonder. And nowadays I have no clue. Although the generic industry at their trade show 5 or 6 years ago once introduced me as that pain in our ass, Gil Roth, which, you know, I earned, but still that was a special situation. We're on better terms now. I'm less of a pain in their ass, but you know. Besides Northern Lights, place you want to visit post-COVID?
Oh, Tokyo. Well, yeah. Just Japan, full stop. And you haven't helped that situation because...
Oh, God, it was the last thing I got to do before the pandemic. Namiko's flew us out there. It was the most wonderful experience. And we're like, we're never traveling again. The world just exploded.
And I remember speaking to you about it. And I was like, oh, I want to go to Japan. And you were like, yeah, it's the greatest place ever on earth. And I'm like, dude, this is not helping. I have been incredibly fortunate. I've seen lots of the world, both through work and through just a desire to see new places. But I don't know, there's something to there's a mystique around Japan that I love how different it seems. And I'm going to try my best to go there this year if I'm able to, because it's one of those things lots of people in our wider family have passed away in the last 6 months or so. And I'm kind of more aware of just how things can change and people can, your health can deteriorate or things outside of your control. And obviously COVID's been a good reminder of that for all of us. And so for me, I'm not going to put things like that off. So if we can travel and people are like, you can't take your kids, you've got 3 young kids, you can't take them to Japan or whatever. And I'm absolutely taking them to Japan because, there is no reason why you can't. It's there are children in Japan.
Amazingly.
So that's what I'd like to do this year. There are lots of other places. I have a list of places that I want to go, but Japan is absolutely top of that list.
Well, our mutual friends over there have also extended the invitation to me and Amy since we had such a great experience with them last time. So we'll see. Maybe we'll overlap. Maybe
that would be amazing. I'm going to dump you with my 3 kids if that happens. Gil,
oh God, yeah, I'd be the crazy uncle they wish they never met.
Absolutely be the crazy uncle.
Awesome, Raman. Thanks so much for coming on. This has been a blast. My hope we get together. Maybe March in New York, maybe, here or there, but, we actually get to see each other again in person some point. And you can see whether I'm limping at that point or able to run again because, bursitis in the heel. Oh. That's my latest. And this all comes from running 130 miles a month for 3+ months to make up for the injuries that derailed me early in 2021, which gets me back on the cycle of being knocked out again early in 2022 and then trying to make up the miles later in the year. At some point the wheels are going to fall off.
Yeah.
So.
slow down, enjoy it, but bursitis I've had as well. And it is not pleasant at all. So rest, get well. And I'm likewise. And Gil, not only thanks for having me on the podcast to talk about the book and that type of thing, but for your listeners, you've been incredibly generous to me since we've known each other. It's probably not a million miles away from 20 years now. It's at least 15 years, I would say now. And I'm genuinely incredibly grateful for our friendship. And, you've put your reputation on the line by recommending us, me and my firm many times. And, hopefully that's never been kind of exploited, or we've always done a great job with anyone that you've recommended. So I'm so grateful for our friendship and relationship, and, keep doing what you're doing, and you put stuff into the world. You're so creative, and there aren't many people like you around. And so, thanks for having me on and for being such a good pal.
Thanks, man. And that was Raman Sehgal. His new book is The Floundering Founder, 24 Lessons to Refocus Your Business and Better Yourself. It comes out next week, which is January 25th, 2022 for you time travelers in the audience. And you can find it through your favorite bookshop. I took a look. It's on Amazon, bookshop.org, and you can order it from your favorite store. It is a fun, quick, instructional read and I think has pertinence for non-business types. I know a lot of my listeners are artists, cartoonists, and other people who are not forming businesses and managing other people, but I think you're going to get something from this. So give it a look. Now you can check it out and get a sample chapter at Raman's website, which is ramansehgal.com. And that's RAMANSEHGAL.com. He's on Twitter as Ramanelli and on LinkedIn as Raman Sehgal US, all one word. I'll have links to all of that stuff in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you could support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Just let them know there's this guy who is recording conversations with writers and artists and creative people and now business and marketing guys every single week, and trying to share a little culture with the world. You can also support the show by not giving me money, because I do just fine in my day job, but by sending me postcards, letters, emails. Tell me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or a piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can also leave me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck in a weird conversation with me. And the messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that, call back and leave a second one. And let me know if it's okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. I would never run one without the speaker's approval. Now, if you do have money to spare, like I say, don't give it to me. Give it to people and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding sources. And that can be for people's healthcare needs, for artistic projects they're making, for ongoing support. There's a lot of things that you can do to help in that respect. With institutions, you can look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, election funds. There are all sorts of charities and other foundations that you can help contribute to help try to build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.